Welcome to EoZTV. I'm Elder of Zion, and today my guest is Brooke Goldstein, the founder of the Lawfare Project. Actually, she has a very impressive resume. Besides that, she's a filmmaker. She is a TV hostess at which TV show? I'm sorry, Jewish Broadcasting Network?
Yes.
Um,
JBS.
yes. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. The there's there's a lot of stuff to talk about, but right now, obviously, everybody's talking about the what's happening with the riots and with the demonstrations and Black Lives Matter. What's your thought?
Well, a lot. I mean, a lot's going on. Number one, I think, in terms of the call to defund police, that's number one, I think is very scary. Mm-hmm. We've worked very long and hard in the Jewish community and also with other minority communities to build trust with police departments and also to build a structure of laws, of civil rights laws that are meant to protect us, that we hope that the police department will enforce. And with the rise in anti-Semitism and physical violence, one of my clients, Lee Aharon, was attacked in a New York City subway. It was scarred in the face. You know, we really depend on the police to protect against lawlessness. And the calls to lawlessness and the calls to defund the police, I think, take away from the central and really righteous message of this civil rights movement, other civil rights movements, which is equal protection under the law. And I'm not an expert in this, but I've read a lot of articles and there are a lot of people studying the infiltration and the taking advantage of movements like Black Lives Matter by more radical groups that want to use it to destabilize this great country. And that I find extremely scary.
When you're saying you're thinking that there's an actual, in other words, you think there's a much bigger agenda for Black Lives Matter than just...
Well, look, it's hard. I'm not the expert on this stuff. I know what I read and I know what I study, but I think that you'd be hard-pressed to argue that the central core mission, which is equal protection under the law, protection for minority communities, a basic civil rights message, is being undermined because there are a lot of competing factors, some more nefarious than others, that are taking advantage of COVID, of the fact that we're highly politicized, of the fact that we had a major, civil rights violation, a practical lynching caught on tape that has galvanized public support. That all of this has created a situation where it's easy for other groups like Antifa or other groups to take advantage of this. And we all have to push back against the type of lawlessness that will divert our attention away from what are really righteous causes, which is, again, civil rights movements that aim to have equal protection for all minorities, for Blacks, for Muslims, for Jews, for women's rights. And when you read the news now, the coverage isn't necessarily about Black civil rights. The coverage is about rioting and violence and Antifa. So that has to be pushed back against. And the second thing, though, I have to say, bring it back to like a Jewish context, it's really made me think and study how we as a minority community, the Jewish community, the oldest, most persecuted minority community in the world, have to start organizing. We need to take advantage of what's going on right now, which is cross-country consciousness and awakening to minority rights. And the Jewish community has not been able to mobilize to the same extent that the Black community, the LGBT community has, the women's rights community has. Jews have been marching in these movements. We've been up front and center, and progressive Jews have taken up the cause, but there are Jews holding signs for Black Lives Matter, Jews holding signs for LGBTQ rights, Jews holding signs for women's rights. How about Jews for Jews? Mm-hmm. How is it that we exist in a society where, almost everyone knows what Roe v. Wade is, or women's rights, or Brown v. Board of Education, desegregation, but I can't name one Jewish civil rights case. that move the needle? How have we not taken advantage of the civil rights movement and the type of organizing and grassroots organizing that is required right now? So that has gotten me thinking. I'm jealous. I'm jealous of the way that BLM has been able to organize and bring attention to their cause.
I understand, and the same thing with the Women's March, and there's a lot of examples of that. You're right. I don't have a good answer for that because I mean, listen, Jews don't they vote for matters that are not Jewish matters in general. They vote for the liberal matters. They don't vote for Israel.
But we haven't forced our matters to be part of that platform because the consequences for discrimination against Jews is much less than the consequence that is felt for discrimination against other minority communities. The Black Lives Matter organization or movement, they were occupying airports, runways on airports when a Black person is harassed or violently attacked. They're occupying bridges. I mean, what is the Jewish community doing but writing letters and writing op-eds within our own echo chamber? There are zero consequences. We are not enforcing consequences for Jewish blood, for discrimination against Jews.
The only slight exception I can think of happened only in the past couple days, where religious Jews in Brooklyn actually went and opened up the playgrounds because they were so upset.
I mean, that's not a consequence.
I know. Well, there was at least risking arrest or something. It's at least it causes something. At least it causes headlines. At least it's saying, "Hey, we have rights too." It's
right. I mean, civil disobedience. I mean, how sad it is that civil disobedience takes the form of opening a playground for children. On that note, though, it's so interesting because watching the enforcement of COVID regulations, so disproportionately targeting the Jewish community and especially the Orthodox community. On the one hand, you have government officials who are advocating that people march on the street for Black Lives Matter, and on the other hand, they're welding shut playgrounds in Orthodox Jewish areas. You have to ask yourself, is there something going on here that's not right? And the Lawfare Project, which I serve as director of, we filed recently a Freedom of Information request against the NYPD and de Blasio to find out why the disparate treatment, why were Orthodox Jews and Jews in general being targeted more than other communities, and was this done intentionally? And another interesting and concerning event is what we spoke about in the beginning, the lack of enforcement of the law and the lack of the police presence. For example, when there were the LA riots, why is it that the police apparently turned a blind eye when there was what people had called a modern day pogrom, which, the riots went, and there was a directed attack at Jewish synagogues and against Jewish areas, and there was definitely a level of anti-Semitism that was caught on camera. Why did the police turn a blind eye to that type of desecration of Jewish buildings? Was that done intentionally? Was it a failure of the police department? How did that happen? So we filed a California Public Records Act request and a New York Freedom of Information request to get to the bottom of that.
That's great. That's very good. There's, part of what's happening with all of this is, what's called the cancel culture, and people are now afraid to say anything out loud because of what could happen to them. What are your thoughts about that? I know that you're a big advocate of free speech, and
we've been following this PC culture. I mean, at least in my career, I started my career working as in-house counsel for Daniel Pipes at the Middle East Forum, and I helped run a legal defense fund where members of the counterterrorism community were being sued for speaking out publicly against radical Islam and Islamism, and 10, 15 years ago, and even today, you can't talk about Islam, you can't criticize Islamism without the PC police coming at you. And that was the whole Charlie Hebdo controversy. So we've been following this for a long time, and now it has morphed into, just talking about something offensive to Islamists to talking about anything that's offensive really to anyone on the so-called progressive side of our culture. So the calls to, take down and the takedown of statues, and the calls to censor important narratives and art like Gone with the Wind, and take that down off Netflix, I think it was, or to create safe spaces in universities, or not to be able to talk about political issues. All of this is really dangerous, because if you want to destroy a free society, the first thing you do is attack free speech. You attack the ability of a society to engage in dialogue, to share within the marketplace of ideas and debate ideas out. That is the most important thing. So the censorship culture is extraordinarily dangerous. And we're seeing this on every level. It's so scary. It's not just in academia, but it's also, you go out to a restaurant with people you've known for 15 years and you can't even talk politics because somebody gets offended. Or people who were questioning, what is Black Lives Matter? Do I support riots? I certainly support free speech. Pressured to black out, or pressure their Instagram account, or pressured to say something, because if they don't, they're part of the problem.
Right.
It's very dangerous.
Then that's it. That's the end of your career if you just say those three words of all lives matter. That's it's like,
or it's not just Black Lives Matter. I think it's actually offensive to say all lives matter, because when I'm talking about, let's say, a family that's murdered from a terrorist, let's say an Islamist terrorist in Israel, I don't want someone to say, well, but the Palestinian lives too. I mean, I want to focus on what I'm talking about, and Black lives do matter. And that's an incredible slogan. And they've done an incredible job galvanizing national support. Where is our slogan? Sure. Where's Jewish Lives Matter? Where is Jews for Jews? How come we haven't been able to organize and mobilize and train at the level that they have? And that's what we should be spending our time and effort on, figuring out how to do that.
I definitely agree. I mean, again, when I say, I was just talking about the cancel culture of being unable to say it. I'm not saying that. I certainly understand the offensiveness. I certainly remember, when Ilhan Omar was going to be censured by Congress, and then it turned into just a generic, we're against bad stuff. So of course,
right, when they could not, it was a resolution or something that was meant to condemn anti-Semitism that got watered down into condemning all forms of hate.
Right.
Exactly.
That was crazy. There's a lot of stuff going on, obviously, and you're certainly involved with a lot of things. I know that like BDS is one of the topics that you get involved with. Can you say what's been going on with that?
You ask the most pointed questions. So I think that we have an incredible opportunity right now, because we have a time when the pause button has been hit, when schools are closed, that the anti-Jewish elements and factions thrive. When campuses are open, they have the BDS votes and, Israel Apartheid Week. Campuses are closed right now. And we've been working very hard with elements of academia and with the in-house council of specific campuses to make sure that we spend this time ensuring that the proper legal protections are in place for Jewish students when they come back to campus, that they're not discriminated against. The policies are in place to protect them as a minority community and also protect Zionist Jews. Zionism is an integral part of the Jewish identity. And also courts are open. So our cases have been going. We just actually entered into a settlement with the National Lawyers Guild. The Lawyers Guild is one of the oldest guilds in the United States, and unfortunately, they passed a resolution calling for the boycott and commercial discrimination against Israelis, and this is illegal under New York state law. So our client, which is a company based in Israel, sued the National Lawyers Guild because it discriminated against them. The client attempted to buy an ad in the Guild's annual journal, and the Guild replied. I think they refunded the money and said in an email, "I'm sorry, something to the extent of, we don't do business with Israelis." And so the company worked with us to sue the National Lawyers Guild, because you cannot engage in commercial discrimination against a party who is part of a protected category. Like, you cannot have a restaurant and say no blacks allowed. You cannot have a club and say we don't allow Chinese to be members. You cannot operate a guild or a company or business and say no Israelis allowed. It is illegal. National origin is a protected category under New York anti-discrimination law and a lot of states' anti-discrimination law. And I think the National Lawyers Guild realized that they were going to lose. So they settled with us, and ultimately they ended up having to admit that their BDS resolution is unenforceable because it calls for unlawful discrimination. So how ironic is that a guild had to be sued, a lawyers guild had to be sued to force them to say and not violate New York State anti-discrimination law. And they're also going to carry the ad from our client, and they're going to do business with an Israeli because that is the right thing to do. And I think it's an incredibly significant settlement because it sends the message to everyone out there that commercial discrimination or BDS against Israelis and Jews is unlawful under New York State law. And even the National Lawyers Guild has admitted as such.
No, that's really great. But again, and it's amazing. Like you're saying that a lawyers guild is engaging in what's really illegal activity in New York.
That's how perverted this group has become, and how the rule of law and the respect for civil liberties is undermined by hyper politicized anti-Jewish agendas.
It's true. You also, I've heard you speak a bit about the use of language, that we should not be accepting the language of our enemies, and that we should be really changing that around, which is a theme that I mentioned a number of times as well. Can you give some examples?
Well, look what's happening now. All we can do is talk about annexation. Annexation, is annexation good or bad? The fuck annexation? It's reunification. We don't annex Israel. How can Israel annex something it already owns? Even those who are calling for Israel to give up the land, how can they give up something they don't already own? Any student of the law knows that Israel and the Jewish people have full sovereign legal title to what was known as Palestine, from Balfour, from San Remo, the Anglo-American Treaty. It's all there. And all Israel has been doing is constantly chipping off what it has sovereign legal right to exert authority over. And the constant use of a language like occupation and annexation, it just undermines our own cause. You will never win an argument using your opponent's terminology. You just can't. I hate when people say things like a settlement. What is a settlement? There are Jewish homes, there are Jewish towns, there's cities. This is not, Russia in the 18th century. These aren't settlements, these are towns. And if anyone, even says that a settlement, a Jewish home, a Jewish town is an obstacle to peace, is an obstacle to a Palestinian state, what they're really saying is there should be no Jewish homes in the future Palestinian state, that any type of Islamist state of Palestine should be Judean reign. And when you talk about things the way they really are and stop using terms that are meant to obfuscate or to confuse you as to what they really are, you're going to lose the argument. If you say to someone, is a Jewish home an obstacle to a Palestinian state, and they say yes, what they're admitting to is there should be no Jewish homes in a Palestinian state. That's racist.
100%. It's and it is. I mean, again, even the question of they say, well, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm only anti-Zionist, and Yeah,
Well, we give them that because the other term that we keep using is pro-Israel advocacy. When a Jewish student is attacked on campus and said, hey, Israel is an occupying state or Israel is an apartheid state, the answer shouldn't be, well, Israel has Arab MKs and Israel has great beaches. We have a great pride parade, defensive, defensive, defensive. The answer should be, fuck you, you racist. Why the hell should I answer for a foreign country 3,000 miles away because I'm Jewish? Do you go up to a Chinese student and say, hey, you Chinese student, what can you justify China's one-child policy? Or, hey, you, why does China have COVID? Do you go up to a Muslim student and say, hey, you, can you argue against Iranian nuclear disarmament? No, that would be racist. You'd be going to a student because of their ethnicity or their religion or their cultural background and asking them to defend a country just because of the way they look. But when it comes to Jews, that's okay, because our entire society and philanthropic initiative has been revolved around pro-Israel advocacy, that we should go and send our students to campus to defend a country thousands of miles away. Our focus should be Jewish civil rights advocacy. The Jewish community is a minority community in this country. We deserve equal protection under the law in this country. It has nothing to do with Israel. And the whole thing about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, I think, is simple. We have utterly failed to educate our students and our children to have pride in their own culture. And we need to preach pride. And pride means that you deserve, as a minority community in this country and also as a minority in the world, the right to self-sovereignty, the right to self-government. And Zionism is a civil rights movement. It's the oldest civil rights movement of all time, and it has informed the Black civil rights movement. It has informed all of our civil rights movements after that. We were the first to say that as a people, we deserve freedom and we deserve to govern ourselves in self-sovereignty and equal protection. And that's what Zionism is. And I guarantee you that if you walk down Broadway and you interviewed 100 people under the age of 35, none of them would be able to define Zionism. 100 Jews, under the age of 35, none of them would be able to define Zionism. But they'd be very quick to say, oh, I'm not a Zionist. We say, well, do you know what Zionism means? They wouldn't be able to define it properly.
That's the unfortunate thing. I mean, it's both. It's not just understanding Israel, but it's also understanding Judaism. It's a big problem on both sides.
Well, Judaism is a culture. It's a religion. It's an ethnicity. We are so multifaceted. And so we need a pride movement, a Jewish pride movement. And the re-education starts in our community. The empowerment starts in our community. And we need to engage in the same type of tactics and social mobilizing tactics from ground up that those other movements are engaging in. We are not organized. Our Jewish community, all of the philanthropic dollars are going towards big box, large organizations with names that are incredible organizations that have done a great job for our community, but are just not well suited to 21st century civil rights advocacy. 21st century civil rights advocacy is ground up. It starts with training youth. It starts with going into academia and making sure that your narrative is in academia, taking these youth and giving them the tools and the tactics to spread out through the country to engage in the type of radical consequence-making stunts, let's call it, for lack of a better word. Anytime a Jew is harassed or discriminated against, whether it's on campus or the workplace or anywhere else, to create a grassroots level of a youth movement that will ensure that there are real consequences to anti-Jewish behavior.
That's really great. I love hearing this. The pride is a problem. Academia, I get nervous because it feels like it's lost. I mean, it's certainly
It's not lost like this. It didn't just happen overnight. For the past 15, 20 years, this country has allowed foreign governments like Qatar to fund our institutes of higher learning to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars, to staff up ethnic studies departments, to institute training programs like we saw at Duke and UNC for K through 12 administrators, to teach them a narrative funded and directed by a foreign government. One of the projects, and this has led to extraordinarily radicalization on our campus, obviously. One of the projects actually that the Lawfare Project is doing right now, and also it's through Freedom of Information requests, is to find out the level not only of funding, but the element of control that Qatar has over academia and over the curriculum. And we have found, and we're going to be, announcing this soon, such an alarming amount of deference by U.S. academia to Qatar in terms of how to teach Middle Eastern studies, how to teach Islam, how to teach about Palestine. They're literally asking Qatar how to teach American K through 12 students. It's absolutely insane. So it didn't happen overnight. And so we need to take the campus back. We need to bring back true liberal values. You said it yourself that, I'm a liberal, I'm very free speech orientated, and traditional liberals would believe that all speech should be out there, that nothing should be censored. And that has turned now into progressivism that believes in safe spaces. All of the traditional liberal values have been turned overhead. Liberals always believed in borders and secure borders and strong countries. And now liberals, progressives believe in no borders. So we need to take back these values, and it all starts with academia and the campus.
What the left argues, again, I won't call them liberals because I don't believe they are, but what they'll argue is something like Trump's executive order on campus for free speech, and that refers to the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. They're saying, well, that quashes free speech. What do you say about that?
Could you imagine, and there's a lot of Jews that are arguing that too.
Yeah.
Could you imagine anyone saying, well, civil rights laws should not apply to Black people, should not apply to Muslims. That's just going to stifle debate about Islam. They conflate two things, and I think this is a really important distinction to make. Title VI protects a student who has been discriminated against because of a protected category: religion, ethnicity, culture, sexual orientation, gender, what have you. It does not stifle free speech. So what is an example? If I have an event and the event is offensive to someone, that is not a Title VI violation. In fact, anyone who sued would lose. To shut down that event would lose, especially if it's a public school, because there is a First Amendment freedom. Okay, they would lose that lawsuit. Title VI would not shut that down. What it does shut down, okay, is a professor in the middle of teaching a class pointing to a Jewish student saying, hey, you Jewish student, you student, stand up. You answer for Israel, answer for Zionism. Or would prevent, for example, a gathering, a student fair, know your rights fair, where they say, you know what, you guys can't participate in this federally funded program because you're Jewish, or because you're a Zionist, or because you're Israeli. We're going to exclude you. The targeting of a student and the prevention of that ability of that student to engage in a campus environment or a fairly funded program, preventing that student from doing that because of their race or their religion or their national identity, that's a violation of Title VI. Having an offensive program, having an Israeli apartheid week, or engaging in offensive speech, that's not a Title VI violation. That's protected by the First Amendment. And that is intentionally conflated. And it's very important for our community not to buy into that argument.
in the EO language, literally, I mean, said explicitly, nothing here should be meant to,
Mhm.
to violate the First Amendment. I mean, it said it completely explicitly, and people are still saying, oh, that the EO is going to quash free speech. It's insane.
Right. And we're sitting here and debating the fine legal points when literally, if anyone came out and said Title VI shouldn't be applied to Blacks or shouldn't be applied to Muslims, there would be outrage. There would be people calling those people racist and disgusting and humiliating them. And the Jewish community doesn't have the gusto and is too embarrassed to stand up for themselves in that type of aggressive manner.
100%. We just have to figure out how to organize is the problem.
Well, it starts with the youth and organizing the youth and conducting training programs and allowing them to go out and create decentralized, organize. Well, that's kind of a contradiction. Training people to create a movement that doesn't have to be so centralized, doesn't have to be under the umbrella of the Federation or the umbrella of so-and-so NGO. And that's how women's rights movement and Black lives movements work, is they're highly decentralized and they are philosophy based. They're not 501c3 organizational based. They're not top down.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that the Palestinians try to hijack pretty much every cause that's out there, as well as the anti-Israel groups, and they'll try to say, well, the blacks are just like the Palestinians or something like that. Are you seeing any traction of that with Black Lives Matter happening? I know they're trying, but I'm not sure if I'm seeing any traction this time.
I don't know. I wouldn't be able to measure traction because I don't know what other people are seeing or buying into, but I'm hearing a lot about it. There's a lot in the Jewish media about it. And I would think that they did have a lot of traction in the beginning when you had people like Linda Sarsour, who was running the women's movement, and something like a Chelsea Handler praising Farrakhan.
Yeah.
There should be serious consequences to that.
Yeah. And that's part of the country. I mean, again, obviously, you're big on free speech, so we're not going to cancel her. But why is it that you say certain things against other groups, and your life is over, you lose your career, and a person can publicly praise an anti-Semite and defend that praise, and it's like, okay, no big deal.
Yeah, because we have not, so far to date, created the type of content that is needed to disseminate, to create a national conversation, like social media content around a Chelsea Handler. Yeah. Like no one is taking it upon themselves to really organize against her or target her and shame her and ridicule her the way that she deserves to be.
Sure. What's the latest stuff happening at your group at the Lawfare Project? Any neat stuff you're working on?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, COVID's happening, but unfortunately, there's high levels of discrimination still happening against the Jewish community. We mentioned the discriminatory application of the COVID regulations. There's 2 of the cases that we're actually about to announce next week are hospital cases where one Jewish nurse and also another, I don't know if they're a nurse or not, they're definitely a part of the hospital or an employee at the hospital, experienced severe discrimination because of their religion. So we've taken on those cases. And unfortunately, there's a huge demand for our services because we really provide the only pro bono legal network for the Jewish community, not just in the United States, but also in Europe and in Canada. And it's really challenging because I'm turning down a lot of very worthy, relevant cases because we just simply don't have the resources to be able to properly represent them. And I've always said, you know, I shouldn't be the only person in this game. And what I'm really glad to see is the concept of Jewish civil rights litigation take hold, and other groups to pop up in Europe. You know, there's UK Lawyers for Israel in the UK. We have an office in Spain. We're actually thinking of opening up an office now in Israel. There are groups now in Canada. And I think it really is about time, because every other minority community has been able to effectuate change using the legal system, not just lobbying, but also bringing seminal civil rights cases, like I mentioned earlier, Brown v. Board of Education, Roe v. Wade. Where are the seminal Jewish civil rights cases? So I think it's a really exciting time for us, because we're setting really interesting precedents in law. And I also think that we have an opportunity now to take advantage of the national consciousness, which is very civil rights orientated because of Black Lives Matter, because of the women's movement, to also bring national attention towards the Jewish cause here in America.
No, that's great. Just if you could just quickly answer, what exactly was the discrimination against that Jewish nurse? So what exactly happened?
So our client was fired for refusing to show up to work on Rosh Hashanah, even though he followed the rules and gave advance notice and was told that he'd be able to take Rosh Hashanah off, and he experienced really revolting anti-Semitic discrimination. And I really hope, because new laws have been passed that give hospitals an element of, you know, immunity because of COVID from liability, that the hospitals are now not taking advantage of this and treating their Jewish employees and think in a discriminatory way, and thinking that they'll be able to get away with it, because they won't. And it's a huge shame, especially in this climate when we're all coming together to help each other, to, you know, rise up with each other, to treat people who are dying of a new and very scary virus. At the same time, hospitals are still engaging in unlawful discrimination against their Jewish employees. It's not right. It's disgusting, and we will not let it stand.
I'm really surprised that happens in 2020. That's because I haven't seen that sort of thing in years. That's really
well. We get calls. I mean, running a civil rights group, we get calls, 2-3 calls a week, and the stories that I hear are heartbreaking. The Jewish community, you know, has always had this image that we are not victims just because we've done well and we work hard. And look, there's thousands of Jews living beneath the poverty line in New York, but we have this image that we're all so successful, and a lot of us are. But don't forget, we are a minority community. There is still the type of systemic persecution and discrimination against Jews, if not more, than there is against other minorities. Just look at the stats for hate crimes. Jews are the #1 most targeted minority community in this country with violent hate crimes. And you best be sure there's discrimination in the workplace. There's discrimination and harassment on campuses. It's rampant. We just aren't making a stink about it.
Just one thing, I'm not 100% sure that it's, I think we're the highest religious hate crimes. I don't believe for minorities altogether. I'm pretty sure it's under just religious hate crimes. I think that blacks have more.
So we are targeted as a religious minority.
Right. No, but I'm saying that we're the highest targeted religious minority, not the highest.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Anyway, this was really wonderful. Thank you very much for coming and allowing me to ask you a little bit and speaking to us. And hopefully we can do this again, because there's so much stuff to talk about. And I very much enjoyed this. So thank you very much, Brooke Goldstein from the Lawfare Project.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, for now, I'm Elder of Zion, and I will see you guys next time.